lens I reach for every time when I need a wide shot that feels quote-unquote cinematic. I'm Eric, I shoot videos for a living and I share what works for me. This is the 24mm f1.4 lens from Sigma. I've used this lens on various projects and on paid client shoots. I will show you why this lens earns its place in my kit. I use this lens when I need a wide look but still need control over the depth and subject separation. This lens works really well on videos and photos, which is quite crucial because that's very important on fast client shoots. And this is the lens that I use for my YouTube videos because I love the depth. So let's just put that back onto the camera. There we go, that feels normal again. So let's continue with the video. 24mm is wide, but it's not extreme wide where it distorts anything. So this lens is perfect for wide shots, and with the f1.4 it's gonna give you incredible depth of field and subject separation like I've mentioned before, but also a very strong key point with this lens is low light, because if you are using like an APS-C camera like an FX30 or anything that struggles in low light, f1.4 is gonna take you a long way. However, you have to keep in mind that if you are putting this lens onto APS-C camera, it turns roughly into 35-36mm because you have to time it by 1.4 because of the crop sensor. But what I love about this lens is that it gives me flexibility with light, with the depth, and in real world shoots, you're really reliant on that. I often find myself shooting in scenarios where the light is not great because I do a lot of documentary films and you don't have enough time or the resources to set up the lights everywhere you go. So this lens comes in clutch when I need very low light shots, and if I'm using like an FX30 instead of the FX3, or if I'm using both cameras for a two-angle shot, I will use this lens on the FX30 just to get that extra low light performance. Now let's talk about the image quality. This lens, as you can see already, has incredible image quality. It's sharp, it's very clean image. And like I mentioned before, I do love the Sigma lenses because they have very nice color that is very natural and gives a very beautiful look to the videos. Across the whole aperture, you're gonna get great and very sharp image. I've used this lens primarily at f1.4, but there were shoots where I had to do 2.8 and 5.6, and every single time it performed really well and the image was just as sharp as at f1.4 or at the 2.8 or at 5.6. And like with any Sigma art lenses, the build quality is incredible. It's primarily aluminum or aluminum, wherever you're from. However, I've dropped this lens, like all of my other equipment, plenty of times. I own this lens for multiple years now and it just can take a good beating. Doesn't really scratch easy, doesn't break easy when it's dropped, and it's, you know, it's a nice sturdy feel with the aluminum finish around the body. Yes, the focus ring could be improved. The rubber ring on the focus lost its color, but to be honest, I don't use manual focus that much. However, apart from that, the build quality is incredible. And of course, it has a weather seal, which is another great selling point for me because I shoot a lot of content outside and the weather is unpredictable most of the time, especially when I'm filming in the UK. So it's very important for me for the lens to be able to handle at least rain. And this lens does great. I've used it in rainy conditions, in snow, and yeah, never had any issues whatsoever. Now let's talk about the autofocus. Even though it's not a native Sony lens, the autofocus is still really good. The autofocus is reliable and for the most part I would say it's great. I've never really experienced any big issues with the autofocus. There were maybe a couple of shoots where there was a bit of breathing on the lens, but you know what, you get that even if the native lenses. So it's hard to say how much better would be a native lens. With my experience, with the work that I do, I've never had any issues with this autofocus. I've read that a lot of people do get focus breathing with this lens. In my experience, I don't get much of it. There was few cases where there was a bit of focus breathing, but it wasn't anything I couldn't handle and it wasn't consistent. It was just on and off thing, and it's a very rare occurrence. But it's definitely something to keep in mind. Now let's talk about the downsides. And yes, this lens obviously is not perfect. There isn't a perfect lens out there. However, let's start with the size of the lens. And I believe this is the Mark 1. There could be a Mark 2. I don't actually know. I need to have a look. However, the size is on the Mark 1 is pretty big, and it gets quite heavy and quite large for a 24mm f1.4. That's where maybe the native Sony lenses would shine, because I think they're much lighter and much more compact. Again, with my workflow, with my backpack, with my travels, I didn't find it to be that much of an issue, but when you do compare it to the other lenses, yes, it does have a bit of weight and size to the lens. If you are building a lightweight rig, that's one thing to definitely consider. That this lens is not the lightest out there. Maybe look into the Mark II. I believe it's much more compact, smaller lens. And like with pretty much any third-party lens, it does not have the inbuilt stabilization in the lens. However, with the new cameras, with the inbuilt stabilization in the cameras, you're not gonna really see that much of a difference. Especially with my run and gun setups, I've never had any issues in terms of stabilization, but yes, it does not have an inbuilt stabilization in the lens. That's something to be mindful of, and if your camera doesn't have great in-body stabilization, you might want to consider getting a different lens. As this lens is the Mark 1 lens, it does not have the aperture ring on the lens, which is not great, but it's not that big of a deal. But if you do like to have a smooth ability to change the aperture on the go, on the shoot, without having harsh stops when you're switching it inside the camera, it's something you want to consider. This lens does not have the aperture ring, but I believe the Mark II does. And again, this lens for most people is gonna be an overkill. At very wide, at f1.4, most people won't need it, especially if you shoot in controlled environments. If you are in scenarios where you are changing the scenery quite often, and especially your surroundings, you're going from in, out, and so on, this lens is incredible because it's gonna give you the flexibility with the low light and giving you the nice depth. Who is this lens for? If you are out there looking for something that you can be creative with, because this is a very creative focal length. It's wide and it's f1.4. You can get incredibly creative shots with this lens. And if you are shooting a lot of interviews, for example, this is a great establishing wide angle shot at f1.4. It's incredible. Also documentary stuff. I use it a lot in documentaries because you can get very nice shallow depth of field, get nice and personal with the person you're shooting, or if you want to have more of a dreamy look and immerse your people into the story more, this lens is perfect for that. The Sigma 24 f1.4 lens is not for convenience, it's for image quality. It is not the smallest or the lightest lens. It does miss couple important but not crucial components in the lens. However, the image quality is incredible, and for the price, I mean, you get amazing quality with amazing results that will always keep you and your clients happy. I've just checked online, and yes, there is definitely a Mark II and it looks way more compact and light. However, if you are looking to pick this lens up, it's I think around 400 pounds at this point. When I bought it, it was way more expensive. I bought it like 3 or 4 years ago. But yes, you can pick this lens up for around 400 pounds and you will not be disappointed with the quality that it produces. But for now, if you want more real-world videography advice from someone who's actually doing the work, consider subscribing. I focus on gear that's actually getting used. But for now, keep creating and I'll see you in the next one.